Okay, so this video is about completing the square. So it's taking a standard form quadratic and turning it into this form. So what this form is called vertex form, and it's really useful for a couple of reasons. It's really useful if we want to solve the quadratic without doing quadratic formula, and it's also really useful because when we're trying to graph a quadratic, it's really hard to graph a quadratic in this form without making a table or something. It's really easy to graph a quadratic in this form. To graph a quadratic in this form, my vertex is at hk, and so that's all I need to do. I need to just plot that point and then I can graph it. But that's for a little bit later. But we're going to start with talking about how we do completing the square to get our expression or equation to look from this to this. So if we just start with a generic quadratic equation, x squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So there's a couple different ways to do this. The way I like to do it is I like to take my c value and move it to the other side, minus c. So I'll get x squared plus bx equals negative c. Okay, and you don't need to do that. There's a different way to do it, but I'm going to show you this way. If I have extra time at the end, maybe I'll show you the other way. Okay, so now the next step is I'm going to take my b value, I'm going to divide it by 2. So I'm going to write it over here because that's what I would do if I had some numbers. I would write b over 2, and I would get that value. So it equals b over 2. And then what I like to do with that is I like to square that. Okay? And then I can add things to the equation as long as I add them to both sides of the equation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this b over 2 squared and add it to both sides. So I'm going to do x squared plus bx plus b over 2 squared equals negative c plus b over 2 squared. And now I didn't change the equation at all because I added the same thing to both sides. And so now this is, so if we've been practicing with our factoring, this is a perfect square trinomial. And so what that means is I could reduce this down to x plus b over 2 squared equals my negative c plus my b over 2 squared. Okay, so I know this is pretty complicated right now with all these letters and stuff, but trust me, it gets easier when we have numbers to work with. So let's take a look at the examples in the book now. So now I have these. This equation here: x squared minus 8x plus 13 equals 0. Okay, so the way I like to do it, I like to subtract my 13 from both sides, minus 13. Okay, so I'm left with x squared minus 8x equals negative 13. Okay, and then my next step was take my b value, my negative 8. Negative 8 divided by 2 equals negative 4. And then I'm going to square that negative 4. Squared. And that equals 16. Okay? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add that 16 to both sides. So I have x squared minus 8x plus 16 equals negative 13 plus 16. Okay? And once again, this is a perfect square trinomial, and that's what we need. That's what we need it to be, right? So it's really x, and then it's always this value that I did, the b over 2. It's always this value, x minus 4 squared equals negative 13 plus 16 is, what is that, 3? So I have x minus 4 squared equals 3. Okay, so now I can solve this. So I'm going to solve it. So, right, and that was our original goal here. And this wasn't something I can factor, right? I can't factor something out of 13 because 13 is prime. So if I'm trying to solve this, my only ways to do it would be completing the square like I did, or quadratic formula. I personally think this is a lot easier than quadratic formula. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to take my square root, but remember plus or minus. So I'll get x minus 4 equals plus or minus the square root of 3. Add 4 to both sides, plus 4, and my final answer will be x equals 4 plus or minus the square root of 3. Now, I would have got the same exact answer had I done the quadratic formula, and hey, maybe you like to do the quadratic formula more than you like to do this. This is a really useful tool. I think it's really easy. I like to do it. And there are times where you need to do it when you're trying to find the vertex form of the equation or something. So now let's look at this next one. Now I have 3x squared minus 12x plus 6 equals 0. If you notice in all the other ones I showed you, this was x squared. This one was x squared. But this is a 3x squared, so I need to get rid of it. I need to get rid of that 3 somehow. So I see, oh, all these terms have a 3 in it. So I'm just going to divide everything, the whole equation, by 3. So I get x squared minus 4x plus 2 equals 0. So now I'm going to move my 2 to the other side, minus 2. So I get x squared minus 4x equals negative 2. I'm going to take that negative 4 now. Negative 4 over 2 equals negative 2. I'm going to square that, and it equals positive 4. So I'm going to add that 4 to both sides. So I get x squared minus 4x plus 4 equals negative 2 plus 4. So once again, perfect square trinomial, and I know that the factor is this negative 2. So I get x minus 2 squared equals negative 2 plus 4 is 2. So now I'm just going to solve it. Square root, don't forget plus or minus, that's the most important part. So I get x minus 2 equals plus or minus the square root of 2. And now I have to add 2 to both sides. So I'll get x equals 2 plus or minus the square root of 2. Okay. And one more example. So this one isn't from the book, but this one is a little bit tricky because I have a 5, a 10, and a 21. So 5 goes into the 5 and the 10, but not the 21. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a method that we have to use when the a value isn't 1. And that's going to happen sometimes. In that last example, we made the a value 1 by dividing out of 3. But here I can't divide out of 5 and have it divide evenly. So what I need to do is I'm just going to move my 21 like always, minus 21 minus 21. So I'll get 5v squared minus 10v equals negative 21. Oh, I have to add, right? Because it's a negative 21, so it's a positive 21. Why am I writing 12? 21. Okay. Now, I can't divide by 5, but what I can do is I can factor out of 5. Well, I could divide by 5 and I would just get a decimal, but I don't want that. So I'm going to factor out of 5. Okay? If I factor out of 5, I get 5 times v squared minus 10v equals 21. Oh, 2v. Not 10v, 2v. Okay? So now I'm going to do my normal thing. I'm going to take my negative 2, divide by 2. I'll get negative 1. I want to square my negative 1. I'll get 1. So I'm going to add that 1. So v squared minus 2v plus 1. But remember, this is all times 5. So if I'm adding 1 inside here, it's really 1 times 5. So over here, I'm going to add 21 plus 1 times 5, which is 5. So 5 times, and now this is a perfect square again, so I get v minus 1 squared equals 21 plus 5 is 26. And now if I want to solve this, I'll divide by 5, so I get v minus 1 squared equals 5 1/5. 5 1/5. And then I'll take the square root, plus or minus. It's really ugly, so I get v minus 1 equals the square root of 5 1/5. And I'll add 1 to both sides. So I'll write it up here. I will get for my final answer v equals 1 plus or minus the square root of 5 1/5. Okay, so that's it for completing the square. I know it's really tricky, but we can work through it. So, talk to you later.